Hello readers, and welcome back to Tell Between Tales. Today we are going to discuss Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik and find out if you should read this book. The answer is yes, and I will tell you why. So Spinning Silver is inspired by the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin, but it is not a fairy tale retelling. As you read, you can see where the inspirations came from the original fairy tale, and she takes these threads and weaves it into something that's entirely new and unique and is entirely its own. I listened to the audiobook, which I would definitely recommend because the author, or rather the narrator, has a Russian accent. I thought that added just something a little extra, as this book takes place in Litvus, which is a fictional country inspired by Lithuanian, Polish, and Russian culture and history. So all of the pronunciations were definitely that much even better in a Russian accent. So I definitely recommend the audiobook experience. So this story begins, we follow our main heroine, whose name is Miriam. And Miriam is the daughter of a moneylender. She is a Jew living in Litvus, which is kind of more this Russian culture. And her father is not a very good moneylender. He's very good at lending out money, but not so much good at getting money back. And therefore, she grows up in pretty much near destitute poverty situation, even though her grandfather is very wealthy and she comes from a more wealthy family. Her core family, with her father and her mother and herself, they are very poor. They don't have enough food, they don't have enough heat, they don't have warm enough clothes. And she grows up for a long time in this situation. And she becomes very bitter, and she knows that their gold, their family's money, is in other people's houses because her father has lent it all out. And so she sees everybody else having enough food and having enough warmth, and she gets very, very bitter and very, very cold as she is growing up. And one day, it's this one winter, her mother gets sick, and she is forced to watch her mother deteriorate and get sicker and sicker. They don't have money to pay a doctor, they don't have money to keep the house any warmer than it is, or to get her mother enough food. And so she basically just snaps and she says, "That's it. I am taking over my father's business." She's 16 years old at this point, and she goes out and says, "I am going to go get our money back." And so she has the power of the law behind her, and she has the power of her grandfather behind her, which the people in her little town know about him. And so she goes to every single door that she can that night of people that owe her money. She demands some form of payment. And she works out a repayment plan. So they give her a little bit that night, and she says, "I'll come back every single week, and you are going to give me this until the debt has been paid." And she starts doing that, and it completely changes their fortunes around. They become very prosperous, and they are able to have all of the necessities of life. And so she's really using this idea of commerce and of debt and of loaning out money and getting it back with interest to increase the amount that they have. And so she is basically, able to, the title called Spinning Silver, she is able to, in her mind, spin silver into gold, because as she lends things out, or as she travels to the capital and buys things there, she brings it back to her town and sells it for an inflated price. So she's made profit on it, and she can increase the amount of money that they have. They can take something that maybe cost a silver piece, and she can sell it for something that would be more akin to a gold piece. So we are introduced very early on to the Starik, and the Starik are basically these fae type creatures, and they are very malevolent, and they love gold more than pretty much anything else. They talk about at the beginning of the book how the Starik will go out and raid the towns and raid the monasteries and kill everybody there just to get all of their gold and bring it back to their kingdom. Now, Miriam's town has heretofore been overlooked by the Stadik. They don't really bother them very much because her town is very small and they're pretty destitute. They don't have a lot of gold in their town, and that's all that the Stadik are really interested in. But everybody is afraid of them. They have magic, and their magic isn't very well understood. Everybody is afraid of them. They are magical beings, and their magic affects the normal people in interesting ways. One way is that you typically forget your experiences with them, or if they leave footprints, you'll forget that you saw them, or you'll forget like why you stopped and you were waiting because you thought they might be near, and you were hiding from them, and you'll forget all once they leave, you'll forget, oh, why are we sitting here? So that's one of the magics that's associated with them among a host of other things. That's just one of the ones they mentioned very, very early on in the book, which I thought was very interesting, very unique, because you have kind of this whole memory loss thing associated with encountering them, but you also have lots of stories. It's like people don't believe in them or don't know of their existence. So where this really takes a turn in the story is when one day Miriam and her mother are traveling back from her grandfather's house to her home, and Miriam brags in the middle of the woods that she can turn silver into gold. So of course, you know, that's going to get their attention, and so that just, it causes a lot of problems. Which really launches the whole story. It launches a lot of the plot line and the events that follow. Now we also meet we have two other heroines, Wanda and Irina. Now, Wanda is introduced very early on. Irina's a little bit later, but Wanda is the daughter of a very, very poor farmer. She's even more destitute than Miriam was in her childhood. And Miriam comes to this homestead and knocks on the door and says, well, you owe us money, and if you don't pay, we're going to get the guards, and we're going to legally do something about it. And so he can't pay, they don't have any money, and so what happens is Wanda ends up working for Miriam. She has to go to her house and work off the debt. Now, she is also the age of 16, and her story arc is one of my favorites out of our three main characters, because when she starts, she is so withdrawn into herself, into protecting herself and surviving, and she is so closed off and full of fear. And as the story progresses, as she comes into her own and finds her inner strength and struggles to overcome the tragedies in her past and the abuse that she's experienced in her life. And her story is largely about her coming out of that, and it really dives deep into her trauma and her sorrow and her family. And I just love how that becomes intertwined with our main character of Miriam, and how those two families end up becoming entangled with each other, basically. I've really enjoyed her arc. Now, Irina, I'm not going to say a whole lot about because she is introduced a little bit later on, but she is our third main POV. She is the daughter of the Duke of the main town that the story is focusing around. And her story may not be as sorrowful and poverty-stricken as our other two heroines, but she certainly has her fair share of disappointments and challenges and struggles in her past. And with her life not turning out the way that it should have for someone being the Duke's daughter, and the way that she's been treated and brought up in her family has not been what would typically be hoped for or expected as the daughter of a duke. And so she definitely has deep emotional issues from her past that she has to overcome. But we find out how this has also made them strong. One of my absolute favorite things about this story is the strength of these main three characters. These three characters have such amazing internal strength that it really just permeates throughout the book and propels the story. Now, these characters are not, like, these characters are powerful, but they're not powerful in the sense of, like, they can wield crazy magic or they are the chosen ones. It's more the everyday powerful, where they're using the skills that they have and their intelligence that they have to overcome the challenging situations that they find themselves in. And that's one of the reasons why I really just love these books and these characters, because these characters are powerful, but they're not following a lot of the trends where they're like, oh, I am super edgy and I'm a super assassin and I'm got all of the magic power and I'm super powerful with all of this magic and I'm the best at everything. So we don't get that. Their strength comes from deep inside of them, in their ability to maneuver through these situations with an internal strength and intelligence and strategy. So while Miriam is very good at commerce, these skills don't really offer her much of a boon later on in the story and the different situations that she's in. So she has to figure out how to overcome those, relying on her own resolve and her own internal strength, which is a pattern that is repeated with the other two heroines as well. Now, the writing is so good. I loved this writing. So the writing is so good in this book. It was one of the things I absolutely loved. I loved listening to the story. I loved the way it was written. There are a lot of things that are said very differently when we're inside each character's head, and there are a few chapters that are narrated by a younger child, and the way that this child thinks and speaks and perceives the world is different than the way that maybe Irina speaks and perceives the world. And the writing definitely reflects that. It becomes a little bit more simplistic in thoughts and ideas and emotion, whereas when you're reading from Irina's perspective, it's going to be a lot more elegant and a lot more sophisticated in the writing, because we have the writing coming from a duke's daughter. So I really enjoyed how the writing does change between different perspectives, and I was just gripped from the very beginning when the author just talks about turning the story on its head. Now, there's certainly no lack of reimagined fairy tales, but this beginning is a very simple story. It's a very simple introduction, and it really sets the tone for the whole book. So I'm going to read you because I just have to, just like this first paragraph from the story, because it is so amazing. The real story isn't half as pretty as the one you've heard. The real story is the miller's daughter with her long golden hair wants to catch a lord, a prince, a rich man's son. So she goes to the moneylender and borrows for a ring and a necklace and decks herself out for the festival. And she's beautiful enough so the lord, the prince, the rich man's son notices her and dances with her and tumbles her in a quiet hayloft when the dancing is over, and afterwards he goes home and marries the rich woman his family has picked out for him. Then the miller's despoiled daughter tells everyone that the moneylender's in league with the devil, and the village runs him out, or maybe even stones him, so at least she gets to keep the jewels for a dowry, and the blacksmith marries her before the firstborn child comes along a little early. Because that's what the story's really about, getting out of paying your debts. That's not how they tell it, but I knew. My father was a moneylender, you see. So if you aren't convinced to read this book now, there's not really much else that I can do to convince you. It is a fascinating read, and it is so much fun, but also has so many serious undertones. There are lots of different kinds of magic at work in this world, and I really enjoyed seeing them play off of each other and woven into the story, and seeing how their elements connect and are related and work throughout the different lines of this story. But the magic is also not something that's like super all encompassing or overpowering. And also, this book didn't have any holds on it on the Libby app, the audiobook or the Kindle edition. So if you're looking for a book to read, this might be a great one that you could get right away. Which is another point in this book's favor. It just keeps getting better and better. All right now, thank you so much. I hope that you found value and enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of Naomi Novik's other books and what my next Naomi Novik book should be. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.